Welcome to First Flight, a new podcast by FlightGlobal. I'm your host, Amber Elias, and in this episode, I'll be speaking with Rami El-Dahshan, head of Clubhouses at Virgin Atlantic. El-Dahshan joined Virgin Atlantic over 6 years ago from British Airways and has weathered one of the most disruptive periods for airlines and airports, the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, as Virgin Atlantic passengers are almost back to their pre-pandemic levels, El-Dahshan has turned his focus to revamping the lounges and customer experiences, including adding more sustainable suppliers and even picking the fresh produce on the farm himself. Rami, welcome to First Flight.
Amber, thank you so much for that introduction. It's lovely to meet you.
So what is your professional history and how did you get started in aviation?
I've always been a big traveller as a child. I've always really been fascinated, as many people in this industry have been, by, moving around the world and just waking up in a new city on a new continent. And sort of straight out of university, I started working for an aviation consultancy firm called OAG, Official Airline Guide, doing analytics for larger projects, mergers and acquisitions and sales. And then I moved to British Airways, where I had a variety of roles: revenue management, marketing, sales. Lived overseas for a while for British Airways, and then made the decision to come over to the red side, which I'm, obviously delighted about. A few roles here, and then, I have the absolute honour of being the custodian of the Virgin Atlantic Clubhouses.
Absolutely. And so for those who don't know, Clubhouses are Virgin Atlantic lounges, aren't they?
Yes, that's right, yes.
Within the terminals.
Correct. So we have several of our own clubhouses, so our brand of lounges. Though we have the Clubhouse at Heathrow, which is our flagship lounge, obviously. We have our Arrivals Lounge, which is our arrivals lounge at Heathrow. We've also got several lounges in the US. So we've got JFK, Washington, San Francisco, and we've also got a lounge in Johannesburg in South Africa as well.
Fantastic. And what challenges are airlines up against when designing lounges and customer spaces?
I would first of all say, one of our key answers to this is that we are not a destination restaurant as an airport lounge. Many people have very different expectations for what they are looking for from a clubhouse, from an airport lounge in general. I'll give you a quick example of that, if I may, Amber. I try and do a shift in one of our clubhouses once a month, where I work as a waiter. This challenge really stepped out to me when I had 3 different parties in my section that were sat right next to each other. One was a honeymoon couple who arrived sort of 6 hours before their flight. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for them to experience. They wanted to try the breakfast menu and the lunch menu. They wanted to drink all the cocktails, talk to all the team. And sat next to them, they had one of our regular customers that we see every 2 weeks. And we know what he wants. He knows us. We have a very specific routine. He's very low maintenance, but he knows what he likes. And then sat next to him was, unfortunately, someone who didn't want to be traveling. They were traveling for a bereavement, and they didn't want to be in our lounge. They didn't want an experience. They just wanted to have to sit somewhere while they waited for their flight. And it really dawned on me that from a customer experience and hospitality perspective, you don't get that in any other industry, in any other segment, where you can have 3 different customers with incredibly different expectations that you have to fulfill within the same area. So, no one is, as much as I'd like to think it, Amber, no one is thinking, gosh, I must fly to New York next week so I can go into a clubhouse, right? We are a significant but small part of someone's decision to fly to a destination rather than necessarily the end result. So we find that quite challenging. And then I'd say the other one that really steps out at me with this question is versatility. Space at airports is at an all-time premium. Everyone is looking for lounge space, every airline, every credit card company. So what space we do have, we have to maximize. I think gone are the days where you could specifically say, this area of our lounge is for X. You have to be comfortable thinking, right, well, this could be a place for customers to sleep, maybe, for some period of the experience. And for others, it could be a dining space. For others, it could be a party space. So one of our challenges is, how do you create something that feels really special, but is also incredibly versatile and can hit all the expectations for customers using it how they want to, rather than maybe how you specifically design the space for?
Absolutely. I mean, I do think that airline travel and the airport experience for customers is, it's so, every person's experience is so different because, as you say, people are traveling for so many different reasons, and some of them are great and some of them are holidays, some of them are business travel, and it's very much part of someone's routine. And some of them are because you live overseas. I mean, I live overseas, so every time I go back to Australia, it's for either a good specific reason or a bad specific reason, but there's usually a reason that someone's traveling. And the variety of people and passengers is so varied that, I mean, I can't even imagine even like a restaurant that would be catering for such a diverse clientele, and to have all the staff being so adaptive to that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And to your point as well, Amber, there is not only different needs, but different levels of expertise. So there are some customers who we see, once a week, who are flying long haul once a week. There are others who this may be the first time they've ever got on an aircraft. It might be the first time that they're ever on an aircraft as a family. Maybe they're a really experienced business traveler, but they've never traveled with a young child before. So you've constantly got this, not only what are your expectations from your lounge experience, but also what's your level of expertise and how do we adapt and change? And also, it can be quite disarming for customers, like I said, who kind of permeate that change of what they want from lounges, from being experts to being absolute novices. We saw this a lot actually during COVID. That was a great example where we had customers who believed themselves to be the most expert travelers in the world. They knew what seat they wanted in the lounge. They knew everything about the plane more than probably I did. And then during COVID, they went to absolutely terrified. Am I allowed to go here? Have I got the paperwork? So actually, even during COVID, we saw that fluctuation of being absolute pros to being novices again. So it's not only the reason why they're traveling changes, but also their level of knowledge and comfort of being able to do it themselves versus needing a lot more help.
Yeah, no, I do remember traveling during the pandemic, and you think you're ready for the flight. You've got all of your stuff organized, you're going through security like a pro, and then something, it's a mask, it's a piece of paperwork, it's part of the airport's closed, you're going to a different terminal, and just it totally upended the passenger experience.
Yeah.
That I imagine being adaptable as, the staff in the lounges was such a key part of the Virgin Atlantic sort of repositioning at that time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember when I started this role, Terminal 3 at Heathrow was shut. And I remember going in, once or twice a week to an empty terminal that had no passengers in, Clubhouse that had no customers in. And I couldn't get my head around, firstly, the idea that it was empty, but then also the idea that, at any point, government could say, hey, let's open the doors again. Let's bring everyone back off furlough. I likened it a lot to our teams, to being like athletes, in that they needed warming up. We had people who had been on furlough for, 1 year and on beyond. We couldn't expect them to go from being stuck at home or doing other jobs to going back to this kind of elite level lounge team. So that certainly took some time. But now, we definitely see post-COVID, some things have changed, but actually what our customers wanted post-COVID was a lot of that familiarity. They wanted to feel like everything had gone back to normal, which maybe did stifle innovation a little bit. But now we're starting to see a lot of those new trends and exciting changes coming through.
So what trends have you seen come through since perhaps the pandemic or even more recently?
I would say one of the big changes is around what people's definition of luxury is. So, even 10 years ago, luxury was, gold leaf everywhere. It was truffle as far as the eye can see. It was really expensive champagne. It was, Salt Bay, right? It was it was luxury for the sake of luxury.
It was very performative and very sort of fine dining, almost sort of like fine dining of the 80s in a way. That sort of like people bringing stuff to your table, the chef coming out, the final prep done at the table. Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And it was the components of the dining or the service that spelt luxury was more important than actually, do I like what I'm receiving? Do I like the way I'm being talked to? Do I like what I'm drinking? Do I like what I'm eating? That's really changed. And what we see a lot more with customers is provenance is a lot more important. Where did this meat come from? How local is it? How many miles has it traveled to be here? Where's the fruit and veg from? Is it in season, or have you clearly had it frozen and flown in from somewhere? And this move away from luxury being what's really expensive to, can you tell me who the farmer was that picked this fruit and veg? This movement away from, I would say, uniformity to what's special about this particular trip that's going to be unique and different. We started a partnership with a regenerative farm, which is very local to the airport, called Full Circle Farm. And, we work very closely with Farmer Tom, who owns the farm. At the beginning of the season, we go through all of the produce we're likely to need. It is a regenerative farm, which means that there's no disrupting of the topsoil with tractors and farming, which is really important to customers. And, some Farmer Tom shows up 2 or 3 times a week to the airport, and what he's got in his van, we need to use. A few weeks ago, we had loads of mint delivered. And we were like, okay, what are we going to do with all this mint? What can we put mint in? Do we go hard on the mojitos? So is that is that people love that idea, though, that you are influencing what you are doing, what you're serving based on what's in season, what's available, rather than, well, we're doing it everywhere and we're going to do it 365 days a year. People aren't interested in that, or that, like I said, that kind of gaudy luxury. It's more about that provenance that we're definitely seeing coming through.
No, exactly, because I don't necessarily see airport food or airline food as being sort of fresh from the farm in a sort of sustainable local way. So I think people have a very specific idea of food that they get at the airport. You're either eating a packaged sandwich if you're not in the lounge, or you're waiting to see what you get on the plane. And to have a dining experience in the lounge that is actually hyper specific and hyper local to that location, I think is something that people are not anticipating or expecting from that airport journey.
Completely agree, Amber. And actually, I'll give you another example. I was working in a section, this was a few months ago, I was working in a section of the lounge, and there was a family who were doing Europe, an American family that's doing Europe, which generally means they're here for 2 weeks. They do a couple of days in Paris, 1 day in Amsterdam, 1 day in Madrid, I could see they were exhausted. It was a family of 5 with some young kids. And it so happened that I'd been at Full Circle Farm the day before, and I'd been picking a load of Cavallonero that had been delivered that evening.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to the family, oh, by the way, you must come and check our deli because we have an amazing Cavallonero salad that I have myself picked yesterday. And you would have thought that, Justin Bieber had just walked into the lounge. They'd run over to the deli. They were taking pictures with the Cavallonero. They were celebrating. They were putting on TikTok. And actually, I was like, wow, what an amazing response to something as simple as local fresh produce that had been picked the day before.
Absolutely, because I just don't think people are expecting it. It's the airport can be such a sterile environment, such a, the security, the processing of it all can be so impersonal. And then to have something like, you're like, no, I literally picked this leaf off the plant yesterday. I hope it's tasty.
It makes a big difference. For example, in all of our clubhouses around the world, at the beginning of the day, before the doors open, there is someone who is cutting that fruit salad fresh every morning, depending on what's in season, what's local, what we can get hold of. Could we go with a pre-cut delivery of fruit salad into our clubhouses? Of course we could. Would some of our customers not notice the difference? Probably. But actually, it's really important to us that we think about sustainability. We think about this, this idea of provenance, because it's important to us. Might not important to all of our customers, but this idea of freshness, of making sure there's very little waste in what we do, that's really important to us and the teams that work in our clubhouses.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned sustainability. Obviously, the buzzword for aviation, I guess, for the rest of our lifetime, really. We can constantly be improving on that. And how is Virgin Atlantic Clubhouses sort of investing in sustainability? And how can we, as passengers, experience that?
Yeah. And this is, I think, historically, when people have thought about sustainability and a luxury experience, they've thought, well, it has to be a detractor. If something's sustainable, then it must mean that it's not necessarily as good as something that's not sustainable. And I think a lot of perception of that is now changing, right? So, I take our Full Circle farm. We have an apiary, we have a beehive. There are 4 beehives on our Full Circle farm. All of the honey that we use in all of our dishes, that's from the Full Circle farm. That's not necessarily just about sustainability in that traditional sense, right? The traditional sense is like, carbon emissions, but it's also about like the local infrastructure. It's the local fauna and floral near to our beehives that are benefiting from that value. We also think about it, again, we do these things below the line in the expectation that our customers will benefit from that sustainability without thinking, oh, good, I'm doing something not as good because it's a sustainable experience. I'll give you another example. We have a signature Clubhouse burger, which is served across all of our Clubhouses, chicken burger. And within that sauce, we put watermelon rind from the fruit salad that we've made fresh in the morning. Now, why do we do that? It provides a great umami flavor. It provides something that's really interesting to the palate, but again, not overpowering. We're very conscious that, again, like I said about destination restaurants, some people want something comforting. So it provides a really unique umami flavor. And it also means that we're using that watermelon rind instead of just throwing it in the bin. We have a 5-star rating with the Sustainable Restaurant Association. We have less than 2% of our food goes to waste. We're constantly thinking about how we can reuse produce in different ways. All those classic ideas like, the bread in the morning becomes the croutons in the evening if it hasn't been used. So it's not necessarily all of those headline items. We're very aware in the aviation industry that around 70% of our carbon emissions comes from fuel, right? We're not going to be able to do anything about that number. But for us, it's all about how do we enhance the experience through sustainability rather than it be a detractor that means that people aren't getting the same great service and experience they would have got otherwise.
Absolutely. And it's, you mentioned the fuel, which is, such a conceptually big concept, particularly for a holiday passenger or someone who doesn't fly that often. It's very hard to quite grasp the scale of that problem and the industry's proposed solutions for that problem. But as a consumer, to be able to, engage with the touch points that are more sustainable in a way that, we understand because, at home we, use yesterday's bread as the croutons. So it's quite easy to imagine that on a larger commercial scale in a restaurant or, using vegetables in a pickle or in a cocktail and really embracing that seasonality of the food is just much more of I think it's so easy to understand how that would make a positive impact as a customer rather than it being such a big aviation industry-wide issue.
Correct. No, we were incredibly proud last year to have our Flight 100, our first ever transatlantic commercial flight by a commercial airline to New York. Those are some really complicated ideas and concepts, talking about where fuel from. I have to admit, a lot of it goes over my head. Like I'm living and breathing it every day. So if there are ways that we can show cultural signifiers to indicate that, how do we think as a company when it comes to sustainability and it not all being really complex ideas, the more we can do to help people understand those things, the better.
Absolutely. And, we've got sustainability, we've got farm to table, we've got regenerative farming, we've got customer spaces that have to satisfy infinite versions of a traveler. What does the future of that lounge experience or that clubhouse experience look like? What can I expect to see in 10 years maybe?
So I think there is a trend that's just starting now that I think we will see real strides in the future. And we talk about this, we talk about mindful indulgence. Okay, so again, pre-COVID, airlines' perspective of luxury was, okay, you're going to come into one of our lounges, we're going to give you as much fatty food and alcohol as possible, and then we're going to put you in a metal tube, tens of thousands of feet in the air, and we're going to do it again because there's not really much space for you to do anything else. And then you're going to go to your business meeting and have to deliver that amazing once-in-a-lifetime pitch, the next day. So you wouldn't do that with athletes. We don't do that with our sports stars. Why are we doing that with people who are under high-pressure business situations or leisure? They want to start their holiday, without a terrible 2-day hangover, or they want to feel right. So we're seeing that in leisure. So you see that in like holidays, right? The way people buy holidays is changing. You see more people going, I want to go on a great leisure experience, but actually I want to do some exercise while I'm there, because I see that as being a luxury rather than it being a chore. And I think we're starting to see that come into, certainly we are trying to think about that when it comes to a lounge experience. When it comes to F&B, we have our exercise space. We have a space for yoga, so people can follow the routines that mean a lot to them. For us, what it's about is helping people continue with the routines and the processes they already have, right? So it isn't necessary. No one is going to, in my opinion, no one is going to go to an airport lounge and go, I've never tried yoga before. Let me try it before I get on this flight, right? But actually, what we are saying is, if that's part of your routine before you travel, how do we encourage that exercise, that mindfulness? So I think we're starting to see this kind of luxury in mindfulness. And I think in the next 10 years, I think you're going to see more time and effort dedicated to curating that sort of mindful indulgence experience. So that could be, for example, in my mind, a sleep concierge. Okay, so you're about to get on an 8-hour flight. I would find it amazing if someone came over to me and said, okay, how have you eaten today? How are you feeling? Okay, but here's some meditation for you to do to help you drift off. Maybe start sleeping half an hour into your flight or an hour, who's kind of coaching me how to make the most of my flight so I'm getting to my destination as refreshed as possible. So for me, I think mindful indulgence is something that we're just starting to see in travel, that I think in the next 10 years, a lot of our spaces will be focused on that kind of experience.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because there's such a, not necessarily a biohacking element, but there's, as you say, there's a real split from sort of traveling of the past and going to the lounge and, everything's kind of there and you have a little bite of everything, and then you kind of maybe don't feel great because you've eaten at a weird time, and now you're on the plane for 8 hours and you're sitting there. But the idea that you would use the lounge as a sort of enhancement, almost like a sort of small pit stop on your overall 24-hour journey, but it has products in it that are available to you to enhance your journey across those little pieces, wellness, fitness, sleeping, food, sort of the key pillars of, having a good night's sleep, having a good flight, waking up the next day refreshed is so fascinating.
And it's also, I think we're still trying to understand what mindfulness and well-being means to customers. Again, I'll give you a great example. Last week, I was in the Heathrow Clubhouse and I saw a customer. She came in and she saw one of our duty managers and she just ran over to her, gave her a big hug, and they stood and talked for half an hour. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, maybe they're friends outside of work. How does this? So I kind of went over to the duty manager afterwards and said, oh, who was that? She said, oh, she's a celebrity makeup artist who's in here once every 2 weeks. And she travels constantly. And actually, for her, it's a great opportunity for her to talk to someone that she, maybe business travel is very lonely, right? So actually, mindfulness for that individual and for lots of other customers, it might be more about how do I make connections with people? How do I feel like I'm part of something bigger than just me going back to New York or going to this destination? So I think we're still trying to understand what mindfulness and well-being actually means to our most frequent travelers.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes just even a friendly face when you're in sort of very process sterile environment of the airport.
Yes.
And and it's a lot of pieces that have to come together to get you on that plane, and just seeing a friendly face must make all the difference.
Yeah. No, I love my job because a lot of customers have my phone number, my WhatsApp, they message me on LinkedIn. They say, "Oh, I'm in the lounge next week. Will you be there?" And actually, they're not there because they want anything. They're there because they feel like, hey, I know people there. I can feel like I have this. So for them, luxury is the fact that they know people there and that they can have that engagement and they can tell stories about what's happened since the last time they saw each other. So, like I said, this whole kind of mindfulness and well-being, so many people think about it in the traditional sense of like, okay, eating less calories or doing exercise, but actually it can be so much more than that.
Absolutely. Just the comfort of the lounge must mean so much to so many different travelers.
Again, I'll give you another example, if I may. When I started this job, someone reached out to me on LinkedIn and they sent me 3 pictures. They sent me a picture of a heavily pregnant lady getting a kiss on the cheek from Richard Branson. And then the next picture was a picture of a small baby, again, in the same JFK lounge. And then the next picture was a picture of a 13-year-old girl in the same lounge. And this was from one of our most loyal customers. And he was just sharing how intrinsically part of his life our JFK Clubhouse was. That was his daughter before she'd been born. That was his daughter on her first ever flight. And that was his daughter, 2 weeks ago, last time she was in the JFK Clubhouse. So for us, we put these kind of products together. And actually, there's some of much more of that because it's people's memories and people's sort of how they identify that as part of key moments in their lives.
Definitely. And it's the first point in that starting that journey on the plane. The destination is, the end point, but really getting to the airport, getting to the lounge, getting to the clubhouse really sets the tone for the trip.
Yes. I always say no one is excited to get to the airport to do check-in. No one is looking forward to security. No one's going, oh, great, I get to stand in a queue and get my liquids out.
No.
People, I love working in our lounges. You see people come in and you literally see their shoulders. They see them relax. You see them get their phones out and they take pictures and they're sort of doing FaceTimes with family members going, look where I am, look where I am. I mean, it's such an amazing opportunity to be part of that experience that people are just so excited every day to be in the spaces that you get to work all the time.
Absolutely. And I have to say, as a frequent flyer, the excitement does not go, whether it's your first time in the lounge or if it's your 50th time in the lounge.
Yeah.
It's every time you walk in, it's, a comfortable place. It's where you want to be in the airport. And it's always a bit of a tragedy when your flight gets called.
No, it's lovely when I do see flights maybe getting sort of returned to gate and you see the customers come back. People say, oh, I get to spend a bit longer with you. I'm perfectly happy to be here for a bit longer.
Exactly. And what is your favorite lounge in the world?
Do you know what? The lounge world is changing. So if you think about lounges, again, 15 years ago, the level of restaurant and retail available at airports was really poor. So you'd have like Gucci handbag shops, you'd have like a W.H. Smith's where you might be able to buy a sandwich, and then you had an airport lounge.
Yep.
And I think some airlines, not Virgin Atlantic, but some airlines maybe understood that infrastructure and they thought, actually, as long as we're better than that stale sandwich at W.H. Smith's, we're winning. Right. But what we're seeing, particularly in the UK, particularly in the US, is that the airport retail space is really upping its game. The number of restaurants that I see that I'm like, this is a cool restaurant brand, Grain Store at Gatwick. You've got Vagabond over there as well. These are London brands that I'm like, I see real cultural cachet here. And they're in airports now doing a great product. So you see airline lounges have really understood we need to be better than the infrastructure around us. So they really need to up their game. And to answer your question, like what people like the Centurion lounges are doing. Centurion lounges, the Chase lounges, these are the A-listers now in the airport when it comes to airport. I mean, other than Clubhouses, I have to always say that. I would be wrong for me not to say that, Amber.
Of course.
But like, I'm always amazed when I go into the Centurion Lounge in JFK and I see their speakeasy bar, the secret bar with this amazing bartender team that really are just astound. And the reason for that is that, these other non-airline companies, for them, these lounges are a huge USP that mean that people sign up to their credit card, that are happy to spend huge amounts. For them, this is a drop in the ocean when it comes to the amount that they're investing in these spaces. So, I'm seeing so many cool things coming out of credit card lounges. I think more people will start playing in this space. People have seen the success that banks have had. Why wouldn't other industries that are really luxurious start playing in this space? I think it's really interesting. But to answer your question, obviously, I would say all of our clubhouses are my favorite lounges. But after that, I would say it's what Centurion Lounge does at JFK is really impressive to me.
It's the sort of first touch point of someone on that journey at the airport, on the plane, and setting the tone for the trip. And the level of luxury and sort of diversification between the lounges is fascinating. And I mean, the idea that someone would have multiple lounge passes and choose the lounge that they wanted to go to within JFK or a Heathrow and have an option, because sometimes they want to go to the speakeasy, sometimes they want to go to the spa, is a very interesting idea for the future. And I'm sure something that we'll see develop.
I think going back to my previous point, the biggest challenge we have is space. So like, I remember during COVID, we said, right, let's watch all of our destinations because airlines might start giving up their lounges. They might start giving up their leases. Whose lounge can we steal? And no one gave up their lounges. Even airlines that stopped flying to destinations, they're still holding on to them just because they're such valuable real estate. I think what you might start seeing a bit more is this kind of blended approach to lounge, right? We see it with Etihad in JFK as well. So they've got the Chase Etihad lounge, right? So you've got this blend of like, is it an airline lounge? Is it a credit card lounge? So you might start seeing people working together collaboratively across different industries.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
My pleasure, Amber. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I hope the listeners are enjoying it as much as I'm enjoying having the conversation.
First Flight is a production of FlightGlobal and is hosted and executive produced by Amber Elias. Audio production by storysolutions.net. If you have any questions, comments or suggestions, or for commercial opportunities, please email podcast@flightglobal.com, and more information can be found in the show notes. Listen, rate, review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.